G'day guys, just a note before we get into today's show. Many of you have been writing to me saying, please tell me you're going to continue doing an anti-porn podcast. Well, I want you to know that I am going to continue doing that. It's a new podcast. It's called Love People Use Things. Love People Use Things. You can check it out at lovepeopleuseThings.fm. You can think of it as your sort of weekly encouragement if you're someone who's struggling with pornography, whether you're a guy or a girl, or if you're a parent, there's also going to be a lot of resources out there for you to help your kids and those you love. Today's episode, by the way, it's going to be really fun. You know what we talk about? We talk about Santa. We talk about Nazis. I answer questions having to do with swearing. I also talk about being an undercover agent and what Aquinas would say about that. Oh, and just to get super controversial, we also talk about communion in the hand, but that's all in the Q&A period. All right, here's the show. Enjoy it. Welcome to Pints with Aquinas, episode 84. I'm Matt Fradd. If you could sit down with St. Thomas Aquinas over a pint of beer and ask him any one question, what would it be? In today's episode, we will ask Thomas about Santa Claus. Yep, Santa Claus. Is it okay to lie to my children about Santa Claus? Welcome back to Pints with Aquinas. This is the show where you and I pull up a bar stool next to the angelic doctor to discuss theology and philosophy. Today we're going to be talking about lying. That'll be fun, hey, lying. We're going to talk about Father Christmas or Santa Claus. Should we be lying to our kids about Santa Claus? Now, maybe already you got a problem with the way I phrase that because you're maybe listening to me and you're like, it's not a lie what I do, like it's a game or something. So we'll get to that. And so I just want to talk about that. I want to talk about lying in general. I want to see what Aquinas has to say, and what the Catechism has to say. In fact, that might be a nice place to begin. In paragraph 2482 of the Catechism, it begins by quoting St. Augustine. This is how St. Augustine defines truth, and I think it's good. He says, a lie consists in speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. All right, say that again. A lie consists in speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. You agree with that? Yeah. I mean, that's it. I think it's pretty good. And look, side note, I think it's fair to say that when many people, let's say many, talk to their children about Santa Claus, they are speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. All right. For most people, it goes above, well, not most, for many people, it goes above and beyond allowing their children to believe something false. They actually, speak falsehoods, intending to deceive their children about the truth. All right. The Catechism goes on. The Lord denounces lying as the work of the devil. Okay, now calm down. I didn't just say that you're doing the work of the devil when you tell your kids about Santa Claus. So just bracket Santa Claus for a second. Let's just talk about lying in general, and then we'll get back to Santa Claus. All right. Lying, says the Catechism in paragraph 2483, is the most direct offense against the truth. To lie is to speak or act against the truth in order to lead someone into error by injuring man's relation to truth and to his neighbor. A lie offends against the fundamental relation of man and of his word to the Lord. Now, the gravity of a lie, continues the Catechism, is measured against the nature of the truth it deforms, the circumstances, the intentions of the one who lies, and the harm suffered by its victims. If a lie in itself only constitutes a venial sin, it becomes mortal when it does grave injury to the virtues of justice and charity. All right, so this is sort of exactly what Aquinas is going to say, and we're going to read from Aquinas here in the Secundae question 110. Let's look at Article 3 here. And look, Aquinas is going to say, every lie is a sin. All right? Now, whenever this question gets brought up, right, is it ever okay to lie? Is lying always sinful? The natural thing arises, and that is the discussion about Nazis at the door, right? And I've had some heated discussions over this question. Because, if a Nazi comes to the door and says, do you have Jews in the basement? And I do, I say, no, I don't. That's what I say. Now, that's a lie, right? But I don't know how to say anything different. But Aquinas is going to say you're wrong to do that. You're wrong. If you've got, Jews in the basement and the Nazis at the door, and he says, do you have Jews in the basement? And you say, no, I don't have Jews in the basement, that you've just committed a sin. That's what Aquinas says, all right? Look, he addresses this issue directly, not Nazis, obviously, but the general gist. In Objection 4 in Article 3, this is the objection he sets himself, right? And this would be the objection of someone who says it's okay to lie in that situation, right? And he formulates it pretty convincingly, right? He says this: one ought to choose the lesser evil in order to avoid the greater. Even so, a physician cuts off a limb, lest the whole body perish. Yet, less harm is done by raising a false opinion in a person's mind than by someone slaying or being slain. Therefore, a man may lawfully lie to save another from committing murder or another from being killed. All right? That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it, what we were just talking about? So what does Aquinas have to say to that? He says this: a lie is sinful not only because it injures one's neighbor, but also on account of its inordinateness, as stated above. Now, it is not allowed to make use of anything inordinate in order to ward off injury or defects from another, as neither is it lawful to steal in order to give alms. And then he says, therefore, it's not, like that's Robin Hood, by the way, hey, stealing to give alms. Therefore, it is not lawful to tell a lie in order to deliver another from any danger whatever. Let me read that little sentence again in case it went by you. Aquinas says, therefore, it is not lawful to tell a lie in order to deliver another from any danger whatever. But then he says, nevertheless, it is lawful to hide the truth prudently by keeping it back. So what might that mean? Well, here we get into the whole discussion of mental reservation, which I'm not going to talk about a great deal. But essentially, mental reservation is just what Aquinas alluded to there, right? When you hide the truth prudently. And so, in these "are there Jews in the basement" discussions, suppose somebody asks you that and they're going to go down and kill them all. You say, well, what if I said, I have no cockroaches in the basement? Okay, that's not a lie, as far as you know. There are no cockroaches in your basement, okay? Now, that might be an example of mental reservation. But then, I always think, okay, but if they looked at you dead in the eye and said, I didn't ask if you had cockroaches in the basement, I asked if you had Jews in the basement. Do you have Jews in the basement? Yes or no? Aquinas says, if you say there are no Jews in the basement, that you've just committed a sin. But I got to be honest, I would absolutely lie. Ugh. Oh, gosh, I feel so dirty saying that. But I just know you don't tell the Nazis. All right. What do you think? I mean, seriously, what would you do? I mean, this is a huge issue. I would probably, who knows what I'd do, right? Like when you're put on the spot, I think your culpability would be diminished to such a degree that even if you flat out said there are no Jews in the basement, that's a venial sin at best, probably, given the kind of duress you're under and the sort of intensity of that situation. I'm not sure. But okay, so let's just leave that question aside. Okay, let's leave if a Nazi were at the door dilemmas. Let's get back to Santa Claus for a second, okay? So several years back, when our children got old enough to understand the story of Father Christmas or Santa Claus, my wife and I had an argument, all right? She thought, and still thinks, even though our eldest is nearly 10, right? She thought that it's okay to tell our children that there exists such a person, right? A plump, white-bearded old man dressed in fur, flying magical reindeer, delivering presents to good boys and girls throughout the world. I disagree with that strongly. I still disagree with it. And for the last 3 or so years, I've always put up a blog explaining this. And every year I get a lot of negative feedback. So, if you agree with what the Catechism says and what Aquinas would say, right, that when you lie, you tell a falsehood with the intention of deceiving, then you got to do, what are you going to do? You got to be kind of intellectually consistent here. Like, it seems to me it's like either you just say, all right, then I'm lying to my kids, and that's okay, or what? Like, what else do you do? All right? Now, here's some of the objections that I get when I say, no, I don't tell my kids about Santa Claus, and they ask why, and I say, well, I think it's a lie, and I think it's wrong to lie to your kids about, the fundamental fabric of reality. They usually say, here's the three things they say, all right? Number one, my parents told me about Santa Claus, and I turned out okay. Once I found out the truth, it's not like I stopped believing in God or doubted God or thought that my parents might be lying to me about God or something. So here's my response to that, right? Sed contra. My argument isn't that lying to children about Santa Claus will have negative effects, or even that it won't have positive ones for the sake of argument, right? My argument is that I think that for many people, telling their children about Santa Claus constitutes lying, that lying is wrong, and that we therefore shouldn't do it. That's it. All right. Second objection is, don't you worry that you're robbing your children of the magic of Christmas or something like that? But if celebrating the historical fact of the birth of the second person of the Blessed Trinity isn't enough to arouse wonder, magic, if you like, or awe within you and your children, you might want to reflect upon that. Right? Or maybe someone will say, I think it's good for their imagination. Again, this might be some of the positive effects that I just alluded to. Sure, maybe there are positive effects. You're probably right. Maybe it is good. But I think there are other ways to encourage your child's imagination that don't involve lying to them, right? Like reading good books, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings. Father Robert Barron said in one of his YouTube videos that this great literature, like the Lord of the Rings, prepares the imagination for the reception of the gospel. Look, I want to make it clear too. I think there's a difference between telling your kids about Santa Claus, intending to deceive them, and allowing your kids to believe in Santa Claus. Do you see the difference? I mean, suppose your kid comes home from school and they believe in Santa and they say things like, Santa's coming tonight. I don't think you need to say, no, he's not. I don't know. I'm not saying that. I think we can allow our children to have imaginary friends. We can allow them to believe in Santa Claus and all that sort of stuff. I just don't think it's okay to talk them into it. Right. And I'm not saying you're a bad parent if you are, right? I get it, right? It's a beautiful, wonderful time and it's a playful thing. I get that. I get it. I mean, I think when I grew up, my parents rather, they would, leave biscuits, or you call them cookies out for Santa. They would even nibble carrots. So we would leave carrots out on the front lawn for Santa's reindeer. And my parents would go out in the middle of the night and nibble them. And so in the morning we'd go out and look, Santa came, and look, the reindeers were eating these things, I actually remember when one kid told me Father Christmas wasn't real. I said to him, of course he's real. As if who's eating the carrots? And he said, your parents. I said, my parents wouldn't be so disgusting to pick up carrots off the front lawn and eat them. Well, apparently they were. So, I mean, what are we going to do here? I mean, what are we going to do? Let me try and think of what you're going to say to me, right? And so anticipate your objection. It might be something like, dude, this is ridiculous. This is totally different. This is totally different from a malicious lie. This is a playful thing. And again, it matters to some degree, right? Because Aquinas actually talks about this. He says that not all sins are mortal sins. Okay, he says you can lie in a playful way. He talks about this in Article 4. Okay, and he says if you do that, if you lie in a playful way, that it's not a mortal sin. But he says it's still a sin. So I just want us to be intellectually consistent. That's all. So either disagree with Aquinas and the Catholic Church and say it's okay to lie in certain ways, or agree with Aquinas and the Catholic Church and say it's always a sin to speak a falsehood with the intention of deceiving, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's it. Those are your options. Yeah? I remember Patrick Madrid, who's a Catholic apologist, he read my article and kind of said I was being ridiculous on his. I love Patrick Madrid, by the way; he's awesome. On his radio show, and one of the objections he raised was, he's like, "Come on, you don't walk in, watching your kids are watching a movie, and you go, just so you know, that's fake. That those people aren't really who they say they are." But again, that kind of misconstrues the argument I'm making here. Again, I said I don't think we have to talk our kids out of believing something potentially harmless, like Santa Claus and imaginary friends. I think there's a big difference between that and, not to kind of keep, flogging this dead horse, speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. So, I'm sure I've upset many of you, but, what else to do? I don't know. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to post this to the top of the Facebook forum. We have a private Facebook forum that you can join. And let's have it out, man. Let's have it out. Like, what is it lying, or is lying okay in this situation? That's what we want to talk about. I hope you all have a beautiful Christmas, and I hope you don't hate me too much. I want to say, if you want to support Pints with Aquinas, that you can do that now by going to pintswithaquinas.com and clicking support. Guess what happens if you give me $20 a month? I will send you your very own Pints with Aquinas beer stein. It is the greatest beer stein in the history of beer steins. Steins. It's like Edelstein. It's like the greatest drinking vessel ever. Take that, Ben Shapiro. It's really great. So you could go to pintswithaquinas.com, click support, give as little or as much a month as you want, and my family and I would be super grateful for you. All right, before we wrap up today, let's get to some of your questions. All right, let's take a look at how many questions we can get at this week. Thank you very much for everyone who sends them in. By the way, the only questions that I respond to are those who are on Patreon, so thank you very much for all those who have sent the questions, and thank you for your support. If you want to ask me a question, go to pintswithaquinas.com, click support, start supporting the show for however much you want, and you can ask me a question. So the first question comes from Philip Haddon. He says, g'day, Philip, by the way. How you doing? I hope you're listening. You said, hey, Matt, if you need more questions. Yes, I do. What are your views about communion in the hand versus communion taken directly in the mouth? And what does St. Thomas Aquinas say on the topic? Around Summa Theologiae 382.3. Okay, well, I don't know if Aquinas addresses this issue. Obviously, it came about after Aquinas. I think the article you're referring to, as I see it here, has to do with the priest alone being able to dispense communion and stuff. So I don't know what I think what Aquinas would do is be faithful to the Catholic Church. I think that's what Aquinas would do. So here's the thing, right? I much prefer to receive communion on the tongue. In fact, I go to a Byzantine liturgy where I receive our Lord on the tongue, and it's kind of spoon-fed to you, so there's really no option to kind of put your hand out. So I think, all things being equal, receiving on the tongue is a really beautiful way to show your respect to Christ. But that's just my opinion. All right. The church, however this arose, you see people saying, well, this arose, as a sort of in disobedience. And that might be true. But the fact is that today, the Catholic Church allows people to receive Holy Communion on the hand. So, if you don't like that, fine. But if you're going to say that that's sinful, then you're saying that the Catholic Church is willingly allowing something that's sinful. Again, let's just call a spade, with lying to, kids about Santa Claus or whatever, So do you want to say that? Do you want to say that the church is knowingly allowing sin? You can. I don't think you should do that. I've said it many times before, right? I think being a faithful Catholic doesn't mean just accepting what the church teaches authoritatively. It also means not demanding uniformity where the church allows diversity of opinion or custom. So I'm sure there are people out there who have a real problem with the fact that I go to a Byzantine liturgy. Well, fine, you're welcome to have a problem, but I don't care what you think. I care what the Catholic Church thinks, right? And the same thing I think is true of, say, altar girls. You might have a really strong preference that it'd be altar boys. That's fine. You're allowed to have a preference, as I'm allowed to have a preference. Right? I think the same thing happens here with communion on the tongue. Now, just think about this for a second. Someone might say, well, I would not dare, touch our Lord with my hands or something like that. Why? Okay, fine, but... And again, you're allowed to... The problem, I think, comes when you start, pushing your opinion on everyone else. When you start teaching things that the church doesn't and demanding that people follow your preference. Another example would be the rosary. I don't really pray the rosary anymore. I pray my Chotki. I pray my Jesus prayer rope every day. So if you were to come to me and say, well, you're a bad Catholic because you don't pray the rosary every day, I would say, who are you? Like, are you the church? No, you're not. Don't demand uniformity where the church allows diversity of opinion or custom. Right? You're allowed to have a preference. Now, I had somebody say to me, yeah, but, and by the way, I love the rosary. It's beautiful, all right? We got to get away from this either-or thinking. Well, either you pray the rosary every day or you hate it and think it's bad. No, gosh, let's be grown-ups here, right? The rosary is clearly a beautiful devotion. I had somebody say, well, look at all the promises that have been given by Our Lady. Fine, but, I mean, there's a million different devotions. There's a million different sacramentals. Like, how many scapulars are there? Like 10? I don't know. There's different colors. By the way, I know our Protestant listeners are like listening to this right now and they're freaking out. Sorry, Protestant listeners. But like, I'm sure every one of these little sacramentals comes with, apparent promises, right? Or alleged promises. Does that mean you have to wear all of them? That you have to take up every single chaplet and devotion? No. In the words of Jose Maria Escriva, there are many devotionals, I think he says, within the church's treasury. Choose only a few and be faithful to them. All right. So the same thing here. Like, it's my strong preference that people that I like when people receive on the tongue. And I actually tell my kids, don't receive on the hand, receive on the tongue. There you go. But I have authority over my kids. I don't have authority over other Catholics when I go to the Mass, right? So I can tell my kids receive on the tongue because I think it's more reverent and I think there's less chance of the Eucharist sort of breaking apart or whatever, but, again, that's my preference. I have authority over my kids and I have authority over you. But back to what I was going to say a moment ago. Like, if you want to start making arguments like, well, it's more, the hands, you shouldn't touch our Lord with your hands. Again, fine, you're allowed to have that preference. But if you're going to make that as an argument that everyone has to receive on the tongue, okay, well, that's not a great argument. Why think that your hands are less sacred than your tongue or your throat or your stomach, for that matter, right? Okay, so that would be my opinion. I think that Thomas Aquinas, as a faithful Catholic, would be faithful to the Catholic Church. And if the Catholic Church allows people to receive Holy Communion on the hand, then Thomas Aquinas would be okay with that, all right? Because he was a faithful Catholic, clearly. Okay, let's see some other questions here. Delta Baptiste, super cool name, even though I'm sure I butchered it. G'day, Delta. You say, hey, Matt, really love the podcast. I love apologetics and learning how to be a well-rounded and responsible man, especially in this day and age, as I am only 16, and most of my age don't care about greatness, and it's good to hear how I've tried cutting down on podcasts and such before I go to bed, get up, so I have more preface with God. Okay, sorry, I'm not really sure I understood all that, but you ask a few questions. Let me answer one of them. You say, what is the Catholic view of secret intelligence, like the CIA or undercover police officers? Even the rule of thumb to take cyanide if captured. It is really important for security and protection of the country, of the family, law and order, and it would be irresponsible not to find ways to take down mafia members or enemy spies. But what if the only way to take them down is to kill someone or do something to prove your loyalty to the mob? I don't argue it can and often is done in a morally wrong way, but there must be a way it can be done lawfully. All right, so okay, this kind of gets to what we said earlier. Like, telling a falsehood, and you remember what I read of Aquinas, he's not just talking about speech, he's also talking about acting in a way to intentionally bring about false beliefs in other people's minds. And he says it's never okay. So, look, from what I read of Aquinas, it doesn't sound like he's okay with undercover police officers. It doesn't sound that way. If, by being an undercover spy or police officer, you lie to somebody. Now, maybe someone will have a response to that. Maybe they'll say, well, it's more like acting, or it's more like they're playing a role. But come on, like, really? Like, they're telling lies with the intention of deceiving. So either just say it's a lie and that some lies are okay, or that it's not okay to be an undercover spy if by being an undercover spy you have to lie. So my understanding is that Aquinas would not be cool with that. He says it's always a sin to lie, right? Now, secondly, you talk about mafia members. Like, if the only way to protect somebody or a group of people is to kill someone, well, I mean, I think we talked about that recently, didn't we? Of course it's okay to kill somebody if that's your only option. or a reasonable option because they're trying to kill you or somebody else. But I think your point was more like, you're in a mob, right? You're undercover, and they say, okay, but you got to kill this person. Well, no, that's not okay. Like, it's absolutely not okay to kill somebody, to be part of a mob for some kind of greater good. Yeah, that's kind of what we might call kind of consequential morality or utilitarian morality. The basic idea with utilitarianism is that you should act in a way that brings the most good to the most people. And it doesn't, so with utilitarianism, the means, the end can justify the means. Like, you can do bad stuff so long as the end is good. That's what I'm trying to say. But that's not Aquinas' thought, and that's not the thought of the Catholic Church. All right, go read John Paul II's Splendor of Truth, where he talks about this at length, that there are certain objects, certain things, certain actions chosen by the will that are actually intrinsically evil and can never be justified by intention or circumstances, right? So killing an innocent person so that you can belong to the mob, so you can get dirt on the mob, so you can take down the mob, would not be okay. Sometimes I've heard people say, back to the Nazis and Hitler, sometimes I've heard people say, like, what if you get into a time machine, go back and kill Hitler as a baby? Would you do it? No, you absolutely shouldn't. That would be a complete mortal sin. You shouldn't kill innocent people, right? At the point, Hitler was innocent. Like, you can't do evil that good may result, right? That's the basic idea. All right, another question, and this is the same guy, this is Delta. You say, why is swearing wrong? Ooh, this is a good question. When is it okay? Why is it a big deal? After all, well, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to offend people, but essentially the S word is just feces, and then you say the F word is just the Dutch word for cattle breeding. Why is it a big deal? Again, I don't swear. I think it's important not to, but why? All right, I'm okay with swearing. I think I kind of agree with you. I think that we have to divide like swearing from vulgarity and blasphemy and swearing under oath. Because sometimes we kind of put these all together and say that they're all equally bad. So blasphemy, intrinsically evil. Right? Vulgarity is evil, right? Like using like sexual slang or speech, or just speaking about good and sacred things in a bad and unsacred manner. I think that's wrong. So I don't think you should do it. But I think these words that you've mentioned, I don't think have that connotation anymore. Certainly the S word doesn't, and the F bomb. So I don't think that these things are evil. I think they might, like, at most you might show that you lack some class, but okay, whatever. I can accuse you of that. But so I don't think they're wrong, but I think certain people do find them inappropriate or wrong, and so you should be cognizant of that, like when talking with people. Like if I was to get up and speak to teenagers and drop the S word, I think that would be inappropriate. And I think it would be inappropriate because, they would all be shocked and they would stop listening to what I was saying. And they might be convinced it's bad. Maybe they've been told that it's bad, and for that reason, they're kind of scandalized or something, right? But so I think in appropriate company, I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying those words that you mentioned. Gosh, man, I'm really going out on a limb today. You shouldn't lie about Santa Claus. I don't think Aquinas is cool with undercover agents if they lie. And here I am saying that I think a lot of swear words are not immoral. Okay, so again, I think you got to distinguish between vulgarity, all right, blasphemy, swearing under oath. I think these are very different things to saying words that your particular society deems inappropriate. All right, so that would be my answer to that. Okay, we got one final question I want to get to. This is from Diego Barber. You say, hi, Matt, who's your favorite saint other than Aquinas? So if you've heard me speak, a lot of the things I speak about are, the issue of pornography. And so I love Saint Mary of Egypt and Saint Vitalis of Gaza. These are two saints recognized in the Eastern Church and in the Orthodox Church. Let me just say a word about Mary of Egypt. Mary of Egypt, we know she ran away from home at a young age, and she became a dancer and a prostitute. Now, you might be thinking, well, she probably had kids, right? Like, that's why she was doing it, the poor thing. Well, you'd be wrong, because in the account of her life that we have, that came down from another holy man, Father Zosima, I think is how it's pronounced. She actually said to him that she would often sleep with men without charging them, and that she made money spinning flax and stuff. She said, I had an irrepressible desire to lie in filth. So one day she hears about this pilgrimage that's taking place to the Holy Land. I forget the feast day, maybe the Exaltation of the Cross or something like that. And so she joined this group of people and sailed with them to the Holy Land and paid her way by sleeping with the pilgrims. She gets to the Holy Land and she tries to enter this church where they were venerating a relic of the true cross of Christ, and she can't enter. And she finally realizes that it's the Lord that's preventing her from entering, and she has this amazing change of heart and conversion there on the spot. She basically gives her life to Christ. She goes into the church, venerates the relic, and then the rest of her life, like, she just becomes a hermit in the desert. And she said, and we know her story because she was found in the desert by this Father Zosima character, and she tells him her story. Like, first he says, like, why are you out here? And she says, you should flee from me like a poisonous snake if you knew the kind of stuff I've done. And he essentially says, okay, well, try me. and she shares her amazing story of conversion. And she said, I think she was a prostitute for about 17 years. And so while she was in the hermitage, she had 17 years of temptations. Like the songs, the vulgar songs would come back to her and all this stuff. So, and then the memories, But after that, she found freedom from it. So I think that's a great saint. You should tell people about that saint. Saint Mary of Egypt, pray for us. All right, that'll do us for this week. I hope you have a wonderful week. God bless you, and I'll chat with you next week.